Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 28th of July 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio behind the technical desk is Nick Green. Well, what's the weather? Not too bad in Plymouth, so we're doing okay, but I've got mixed reports across the country. I think it's a bit gusty in Brighton. I've got wet and windy in some places in Wales, dry in Rhondda though, drizzly in Norfolk, and I've got nothing north of the border at the moment. So a mixed bag at the moment, pretty typical July summer's day really, I suppose, for the UK. Well, more important matters, just how are the banks and courts stealing our property? No better person to talk about this than Tom Crawford. Let's just have a look at the moment with the news release that we did on Friday. This was the UK column report late on Friday afternoon, where together with other alternative news sources, we put up a news flash that Tom Crawford and his supporters have been able to retake his Nottingham home. This was a photograph taken from the roof and kindly tweeted out. So we can already see a whole host of police cars there. Remember, this is not an armed siege. This is a peaceful protest of people against what's been going on in the banks. And yesterday we also talked with Guy Taylor, who he had been trying to go into Colton Police Station to report what was going on. They refused to take a crime report concerning Tom Crawford's property. And a key document is this one, a High Court document, which actually says that the Crawford family have permission to obtain any documents to which they are entitled under the civil procedure rules from the court file in relation to this claim over Tom's property. And two, it says in particular, court staff are requested to provide the defendants with copies of any warrants of possessions and orders for possession. And of course it was the warrant for possession which Guy Taylor described as a unicorn, saying he didn't believe it existed. Well, let's hear from Tom Crawford. Tom, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm fine, the family's fine, and we're all fit and battling away.
Good. Well, obviously the events took a turn for the worst over the weekend. I think early hours of Sunday morning, police really took steps to get people down off the roof of your house, including, I understand, doing a lot of damage inside the house, metal rods through the ceilings. But ultimately it was agreed that your team would come down off the roof, I think on Sunday morning, and then they were arrested. Can you tell us exactly what did happen, please?
Yeah, they got onto the roof, in through the skylight, into the loft, and there they settled down. And the demands were they wanted to see the warrant. That's all they wanted, just the warrant. And they had many people talking to them, trying to persuade them to come down, and they insisted. All they wanted was the warrant. Then they got a special squad from Manchester Police that used steel rods, and they smashed the ceiling in the lounge, which I'm told now is collapsed. So these rods were going up where they were standing. Health and safety was no concern with these criminals. They didn't care what injury. In fact, one of the lads got his ankle badly damaged by the rods hitting it. There was a young lady up there. They didn't care about her. So they got out of the loft and got onto the roof. And once again, they tried to use the rods through the tile roof. If they'd fallen off our roof, you see by the first photograph the distance that they could have fallen because it's on a hill. It could have been fatal.
So Tom,
yeah.
This is pretty brutal behaviour by the police. Obviously, in all the films that have gone out over the last few weeks, we've seen this incredible police response. This isn't, you're not an armed criminal gang. You're a man trying to protect his home with his family, and members of the public have acted very peacefully to support you. But we've got this violent reaction from the police, and there's a certainly a black irony here that the police arrest 5 men and 1 woman, one woman, and they accuse them of damage. Is that right?
Yes. First of all, they came into the court. I was in court watching the proceedings, and they were originally charged with, I think it was criminal damage or burglary, or they dropped all those charges, and they couldn't use trespass for the simple reason that Sue and myself are the owners of the property, and our name's still on the register, land registry. Now, the next thing they did was they appeared in the court, and the judge, Judge Divas, he said these charges aren't right. There's something wrong with them. They're not correct. It's more serious than this. And he proceeded to say that the charge should be a fray. He took over from the CPS. He was being judge and jury. He was bringing the charges. He should have been independent to judge the case. But no, he changed the charge, which is a much more serious charge. In this respect, it starts off at riot, then it's criminal damage after that, and then it's down to a fray. So it's more serious than breaking a window. And my son, he got charged before for throwing some food up to them. That was 12 hours after the window apparently got broken, and the police were sticking their heads through it. Now he's got charged with breaking it. So it's just to keep my son and all these people away from the property. So one of them got detained, unfortunately, until the 10th of August, but the rest are all out on bail not to go near the property.
Right, so this is a very critical point you're raising here. In today's news, I'm going to be talking about the massive erosion of civil liberties in Britain in 2015, and of course the danger of secret courts. Ken Clarke, one of the men who's been calling for secret courts, and you are now talking about a judge, well, acting as judge and jury, but also acting for the CPS in changing the charges. So there's something extraordinary going on in your case. I had a report by telephone early this morning of another gentleman who says he's got evidence of the fact that building societies and banks are selling on mortgages, and of course the moment they've done that, they have no right to claim charges from the original mortgage owner, and so more evidence coming to light. Is there any way that the judges don't know what the banks are doing?
Yes, there are ways if they totally ignore the evidence and just listen to the banks. You started off saying I wasn't a drug dealer. Myself and Sue are more dangerous than that. We're shining a light on their corruption. All these judges know what's going on. There may be an occasional one. Up in the High Court, there are a few good ones. I can't condemn all of them. And they look down on these judges in the county court because they know that there's serious crimes going on. In fact, they should be whistleblowing, but they're not.
No, well, tell us about this ruling from the High Court, because this is a very key document for you, because it's given you the authority now to demand to see court documents, and of course the warrant, which, as Guy Taylor has said, is at the moment it's a unicorn. It doesn't appear to exist. What's going to be your next step armed with that High Court warrant, High Court document? Sorry.
Right. Very soon I'll be going into the court and demanding to see this document, and it doesn't say just to see it. It says copies. So I'm going to tell them that I require a copy or they're in breach of a High Court document, and then I'll be back down. I know they won't give it to me. They simply will refuse. So we'll be down the High Court, but we'll be bringing other things through the High Court against Bradford and Bingley, the court system, and the police in particular.
Right. I notice in the language of that document, Tom, in paragraph 2, it says, in particular, court staff are requested to provide the defendants with copies of any warrants of possession, and they're using request. Is there a significance in that or not? And to me, that's very polite language for saying, well, if you feel you could you please provide the defendants with this warrant? It doesn't seem to be a very strong phrase to me, but maybe I'm not reading the legalese properly.
Well, the legalese, it's right at the very top. These people have to follow orders of a High Court judge, and it says at the very top, an order. This is ordering them. Right. It's not requesting them. It is put in polite words because that's the way they speak, but it says an order. So, yeah, they've got to do it.
Okay. And the other point which has been of great interest to us is that we've watched as the Nottingham Post has been gently helping the other side by now trying to claim that your neighbours have all fallen out with you. Your neighbours are terrified to go out because of protesters. And the last article that we saw from the Nottingham Post was clearly designed to make anybody who'd been there to support you as a bad, aggressive, violent, threatening person. And your neighbours had now fallen out with you almost. What's the state of play with your neighbours? Because you've certainly had good support from them leading up to these events.
Yeah, our neighbours, 99% are still very, very supportive. They're terrorised by the police and by the security staff there. There is two that aren't very happy with us. One is an old couple that's got the police. Their son's a policeman, and they've been holding meetings in his house. I know they have, trying to plan this. And then there's one other one, and unfortunately she's just an old lady. She's a little bit demented, dementia, and she does shout at people, and so that's the type of people they would like to interview, not our normal. Well, just to take you up to speed, with all the things that's going on with the people, the security, these neighbours have been terrorised. They've been in touch with the council, and they had the councillor down, and they've been in touch with the police, and neither will help. Now, the people there are majority Muslims, and they're going into the centre of not very good Muslims because they get drunk at nights, but they go into the centre of our little chase, form a circle, and then I'll start praying. Well, I went down to see the imam and said, please go down, see if you can calm these people down. So it's only been me that's actually tried to do something, while the council and the police abandoned my neighbours. I think that speaks volumes for our family and speaks volumes of the police.
Right, Tom, and lastly, what support, if any, have you had from your local MP?
Oh, Vernon. He's very good at sending emails, but he's trying to get credit, I'm told, about some of the things that he's going to look into it. He didn't need to look into it if he did his job in the first place. He sent a request down to the Justice Secretary to look into the request for a hearing, which was denied by the court, which they had no right to do. We still haven't heard. That's the nearest thing to helping my family. He's done nothing for anyone else. Right. Tea shops is the type of thing. Fates. He's very good at fates.
Okay, and Tom, as a last comment before I must move on, what would you like? How can the public continue to help you? What would you like to see people doing, not only to support your case, but in broader terms?
Well, the reason why all this police activity is taking place is to frighten the general public. You come against the banks and the courts, and this is what we'll do. Don't be frightened. Don't be intimidated by these people, because if you do allow them to do this, people will suffer. Not just my family. I'll keep on fighting, but there's other families there that need support. So write your MPs, write requests, freedom of information. For one, I'd like you to write in and ask the police, not how much this has cost, how much have they received, and who is the paymasters behind all of this. just simply get onto all the channels, watch this UK column, support anywhere that you feel you can support.
Okay. Well, Tom, we will do everything that we can to continue supporting you. And I think you're absolutely right. Although we know most of the MPs don't want to act, they're either complicit or they're too frightened. Communication and people banging on their doors does keep them under pressure. And that's what we've got to do. Okay, well, we will say all the best to you and your family. We'll continue to report, and thank you for joining us today to bring us up to speed with what's happening. Thanks you.
Thanks very much, and any updates, we'll let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Well, there we are. We are really getting into the heart of what's going on in Britain under David Cameron's Conservative government. And what are we talking about? We're talking about the theft of private property through corrupt courts, fraudulent documents, and above all, we're now starting to see how the corrupt international banks are simply hoovering up property under criminal companies that are literally stealing property. Well, Tom Crawford's also mentioned, of course, problems inside the court. This is a subject which the UK column has consistently been warning of. The so-called secret courts used to steal children, secret courts used to cover up dirty dealing. With the case of Melanie Shaw, secret courts used to imprison a child abuse victim. Well, we just remind ourselves that the prosecution is summing up today in the Bedfellows versus the Crown case. This is to do with allegations of sexual assault against Ken Clarke. It's been noticeable that mainstream press have not been reporting ever since the opening statements that Bedfellows claim was a fantasy. But we are now starting to see the odd report. The Guardian here showing a fairly weak article, again saying that the actor's sexual assault claims are preposterous. So Ken Clarke saying that the allegations were something like something to do with aliens, a very strange statement. What we'd like to remind the public is that Ken Clarke, of course, has been a strong supporter of secret courts. Why would that be? Well, if we look at other members of the political establishment, we can go nowhere better than Lord Sewell, who's finally decided that he should quit. He's going, having boasted of having sex with a BBC presenter, no surprise there, and seeing 13 mistresses, and of course being on film, apparently taking cocaine. He has said this: the question of whether my behaviour breached the code of conduct is important, but it's essentially technical. So this man doesn't really seem to have any regrets about what he's done. Maybe the UK column is going to shock some of our viewers and listeners today by saying we think this man should stay in post, because surely he is a perfect ambassador for the type of person that we've now got not only in the Lords but in Westminster. So he's previously been in the job of standards in public life, monitoring what goes on amongst the people in the Lords. We think Lord Sewell should stay in post, because now we can see exactly the type of person who's governing us, and we've got no worries about ifs or buts. But I can understand if a few people may disagree. Well, what are these people up to? Well, what they've been doing over recent weeks is imprisoning child abuse whistleblowers. And we intend to stay on this subject because, of course, this is at the heart of the blackmail control by which British politicians are doing the bidding not of the general public, but of overseas powers and international banking interests. So if we see that Tom Crawford's family are getting a particularly hard time in court and what's happening around their supporters in court, let's remember that Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire Police Chris Eyre has been using his police officers to put great pressure on Melanie Shaw, aided and abetted, of course, by Alison Saunders, head of the Crown Prosecution Services, the lady who could help protect Lord Janner, but was only too keen to see Melanie Shaw in prison. And as with Tom Crawford, let's remember that it takes a judge to do the ultimate dirty deed. And one of those judges was Judge Geoffrey Dickinson in Nottingham Crown Court. So Chris Eyre, what sort of Nottinghamshire police force is he running? Well, thank you to our viewer that reminded us of this case. This is Helen Chamberlain, the lady who's in charge of, a police officer who's in charge of public protection in Nottingham. Child abuse also comes under her remit. And back in 2010, Nottingham police were going to let her off a speeding incident where she was caught driving at nearly 30 miles an hour over the speed limit. Well, in that case, the judge wasn't going to let it happen. But we say there's clearly one rule for Superintendent Helen Chamberlain, Nottinghamshire Police, and quite another for abuse victim Melody Shaw. But we can also say that still no proper BBC investigation into child abuse. Why are we interested in that particular subject? Well, let's have a look at what BBC Radio 4 has been up to, and what better place to go than this particular Twitter page. Joe Kent, journalist, producer at BBC Radio 4. He says the views are his, not theirs, retweets neither. He seems to regard himself as some children's plaything. And an immediate tweet on this page is to do with the front page of The Independent, talking about the Freedom of Information Act. Before we come on to that, let's just have a look at what was tweeted out. And in this one here, we've got that he's pushing out the BBC's Current Affairs, and this is a documentary about the satanic cult that wasn't. It's underneath BBC Radio 4. For those who missed it, you can listen to the satanic cult that wasn't here. So here is this man helping to promote the line that, despite the testimony of the two Hampstead children clearly speaking about what had happened to them on video, according to Mr. Kent from BBC Radio 4, the whole thing is a little bit of a joke and the public shouldn't be too worried. Well, by the same token, this was also retweeted, a very strong piece on Russia Today. And then it goes on to say, here's our BBC investigation, China's illegal trade in babies. How interesting that, of course, the two Hampstead children were also talking about a trade in babies. But as usual, the BBC not interested in the victim, but pretty interested in assisting the cover-up of what has actually taken place. And we'll reinforce this because the Freedom of Information article, which the gentleman was tweeting out, was this one, which is The Independent saying the end of the Freedom of Information Act, right to know in peril as government targets freedom of information. And we get a clue really to what's going on here by the fact that in the article they quite rightly point out that Tony Blair described the Freedom of Information Act as one of his greatest regrets. What he really means is his biggest mistakes, because that act has allowed an educated public to start to pull the truth out of this corrupt LibLabCon system. But there is a review to come into place, which will be finished by November, and that will consider whether there's an appropriate balance, whether there is an appropriate public interest balance between transparency, accountability, and the need for sensitive information to have robust protection, and whether the operation of the Act adequately recognised the need for a safe space for policy development and frank advice. So make what you like of the words there. What we think is going on is the government is getting scared too much information is coming to the surface. And as the Independent points out, this is the government about to close down freedom of information to protect the corrupt workings of the government. Well, one of the key issues that we say the British government is simply terrified of is the subject of child abuse, the blackmail route by which key members of the British government are simply doing the bidding of overseas and banking powers. Who can actually deal with this situation? Well, it should be Britain's police forces, but let's remind ourselves what the BBC has been up to. And of course, it was the BBC that's been brought in to prop up the image of the chief of the Metropolitan Police with what we have called a spaghetti western over Bernard Hogan Howe. And the articles that the topics that the BBC programme discussing, of course, moving the public nicely away from anything to do with child abuse, back into the subject of Mark Duggan. And here we are, the BBC simply making out what a great job the Met Police are doing. Well, coming from a different angle, and we had this, of course, fingers being pointed at Hogan Howe over the cover-up of child abuse, and took the UK column to point out that former Procurator Fiscal of Scotland, Eilish Angelini, was the lady who was actually brought in to do the Met's report on rape. So everything above board there. BBC, of course, makes light of Jimmy Savile's abuse of children, and this is where Andrew Marr was simply saying, well, of course, really, it's only good for a subject like a play. So we've got the BBC giving publicity for a play about Jimmy Savile and trying to convince the public that sometimes drama can answer the really important questions more effectively. How can we deal with this sort of stuff from the BBC? Well, I think the UK column answer to that is that we need to do some penetrating research into what the BBC really is, who the people are, and what their £3.65 billion is actually being used for. So if you haven't seen it already, do have a look at the UK column, BBC Exposed from Child Abuse to Subversion article, where we've started to take apart what the BBC is really about. And of course, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, BBC Media Action, we're calling it the devil's own charity. The list goes on, and we reminded people a few weeks ago that the BBC, of course, carried out a character assassination of Geoffrey Dickens, the minister who'd originally tried to get the subject of child abuse into the public mind and indeed get the police to do their job properly. What did the BBC do? They put out an article attacking him at every stage of the way. So all of the key headings in this article were designed to undermine Geoffrey Dickens. No one can be certain if it was all Geoffrey Dickens' fault that he was not often taken seriously. He was a bit of a parliamentary buffoon, and the trouble with Twinkle-Toed Dickens, who enjoyed telling tales of his exploits at tea dances, that he never seemed to be quite sure the difference between the trivial and the serious. So this is a carefully crafted BBC article designed to undermine the person who was trying to get the truth out about, of course, widespread child abuse within Britain's political elite. It goes on. The BBC here setting up a letter designed to deceive the public. The letter was supposed to be celebrities claiming that the BBC had to be protected at all costs, but in reality the letter had actually been created by BBC director Danny Cohen himself using celebrities, and it took Michael Palin to actually reveal this in an interview. So the BBC, set up supposedly to provide the British public with a truthful agenda, simply falsifies information in order to deceive the public, and this organisation is allowed to stand. Could it be any more blatant? Well, I think the answer to that is yes, because ironically the BBC has got the very film footage which tells the nation that British politicians were involved in paedophilia, and what happened when they were involved in paedophilia? Well, of course, that knowledge was simply used by the political party to blackmail them. Don't believe UK Column? Let's have a look at a screenshot of the BBC film footage in which Tim Fortescue, Conservative whip, 1970-73, said this: "It might be a scandal involving small boys, anything. They, the members, would come and ask if we might help." So he was a whip, and what he's openly saying is that politicians who'd run into trouble with small boys incidents came to the whips, and the whips helped them because once they'd done that, they effectively owned that person. And yet this is the same British government, the same Conservative Party that says nobody knew about child abuse. We say, of course they knew, and so did the BBC. Stay with us on this one, because we see at the moment that there is a big attempt by the BBC, amongst others, to pull public attention off child abuse. And of course, why do they want to do this? Because the government is adamant they want it swept under the carpet. So here was the diagram that we did some time ago, showing all of the people intimately connected with Jimmy Savile, including the British royal family, Margaret Thatcher, the police, security services, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and supposedly none of them knew he was a paedophile. Sky News reported that dossiers on perverts in government had been hidden. Nobody knew. Why does nobody knew? Well, David Cameron's spilling the beans here because he says it's all nonsense and we should move on from what he calls historic child abuse. It's not historic, it's current, it's still going on, it's still being covered up. And the reason that Cameron wants it pushed to one side is because, of course, this is the subject that literally can and will bring down the British government once our ministers are revealed for what they are. Hence we say that Lord Sewell should stay in post, because clearly he shows exactly what they are. Well, let's have a look at this. BBC exposed from child abuse to subversion. If you haven't read that article, please do have a look at it. If you like what we're doing with UK Column and would like to support, please consider taking a subscription or making a donation. Do have a look at the website, do read the articles, and this was an extremely good article about the European Union, how it was expanding, empire building under the radar. This is a subject which we all need to stay up to speed on. It hasn't gone away, and the EU at the moment still stripping away freedoms and rights from the general public in Britain. What can we do about this? Well, here is a group in Nottingham who are saying we're not going to sit at home and do nothing. They've organised a peaceful meeting in order to ask questions about what's happening in Nottingham. We demand answers, and that's going to take place at Gedling Council Office, Arnold Hill, Thursday, 30th of July at 9:30. So if you can, please be there, please attend, and as UK Column always says, please be polite and well behaved, because that gives your cause most power against hostile press, and of course the BBC, should they turn up. Unlikely, I think. Well, it was again one of our viewers that pointed out a very interesting article which we think starts to encapsulate the danger that we're all facing at the moment from control of the courts. And this is the article from the New York Times, and it says a terrorism case in Britain ends in acquittal, but no one can say why. So if we have a look at this article, it's basically talking about a reporter who covered a trial which was to do with terrorist type material, but it says that if he writes or even talks about the reason that the student Errol Insadel was acquitted, Mr. Cobain faces prosecution and possibly jail. So a reporter faces prosecution and jail for trying to tell the public what's happening in secret courts. He said, "I know the essence of what was happening, but I can't tell. I can't even talk to my editor about this." And then he goes on to say this, "Not even the Russians do that to journalists." So we have finally got some indication that mainstream journalists are starting to realise something very nasty is going on in Britain. We say it's a creeping dictatorship where, of course, control of the press goes hand in hand with secret courts. And perhaps we ought to also remind Mr. Cobain that investigative journalists don't seem to live long in dictatorships. Well, this is the case he was talking about. Mr. Insadel was born in Turkey, lived in London and travelled to Syria, where he met fighter Ahmed to discuss terror attacks. In September 2013, he was stopped by police for speeding. A slip of paper was found in his car, which had the address of one of Tony Blair's properties. So the police bugged the car, and later on he's heard talking about a gun. They eventually, armed police stop him in a car with another gentleman, Ramul, near Tower Bridge, and the police shoot out the tyres of the Mercedes. A memory card is found in Insadel's phone case describing bomb assembly. And in 2014, Insadel sentenced to 42 months for possessing a bomb-making guide, and Mr. Ramul is also jailed for similar material. But the jury couldn't agree on the conviction of Insadel on broader terrorism charges. So there was a retrial and Insadel was acquitted, but for reasons unknown to the public. And this is the substance of this case, that here we've got somebody going through the court system, but the public is not able to know what is going on. And the reporter has said that some of the trial was public, some secret, and some hung in a sort of no man's land where nobody was sure what was going on. But what the reporter did add is that all of the notebooks of journalists who had been in any part of the case were taken for storage by MI5. Well, if you think that's worrying, you shouldn't be, because according to a survey with YouGov, most of us have broad support for increased surveillance powers by Britain's security services. And we've apparently said that police and intelligence agencies should retain communications data for 12 months. Well, I don't think I gave my permission for that, and I certainly wouldn't. But here is spinning of the truth. What is the basis of this survey? Whatever it is, it's dangerous stuff. This is key comments by Mr. Murphy from King's College. What did he say? In constitutional terms, secrecy is anathema to the rule of law because legal and political accountability is impossible without transparency. If errors are made, they must be brought to light, but there is little incentive for the prosecution, intelligence agency, or government departments to acquiesce when they can invoke national security to ensure secrecy. And to ram the point home, in the appeal against the reporting restrictions on this case, it's been adjourned until the autumn, but in one public session this month, Lord Chief Justice John Thomas acknowledged that there were really difficult constitutional issues at stake, and it's also been told that a few minutes later, reporters without special permission to attend his hearing were politely asked to leave. So this is the state of Britain today: massive cover-up, secret courts, control of the media. And who's the man running this show? Well, here he is, David Cameron. And what was he doing a few weeks ago? Well, he was pressing for further attacks on free speech and liberty, visiting GCHQ, where he's pushing to give them access now to encrypted communications. So David Cameron, Prime Minister at the moment, working step by step with his colleagues in the Cabinet Office to produce a dictatorship in Britain. And it's taken a few MPs to actually realise some of the things going on here. So we've got Tom Watson and David Davis saying High Court rules data retention and surveillance legislation is unlawful. I pause slightly because it gets increasingly difficult for the UK column to decide how we can put this type of information over in a way that is suitably clear or clearer than we've done it previously. We say Britain is being taken into a dictatorship, and that is happening very quickly. What happens in dictatorships? Very serious things. People are imprisoned with no proper trial. People are murdered by the state. Well, let's bring in Boris Johnson's water cannon. And if you go on the UK column website, have a look at this article, Boris Johnson and the death penalty. Now, of course, national press at the moment has been making a joke out of the fact that Boris Johnson has bought water cannon which he's not permitted to use. And of course, in an empty parliament, there was a reply by Theresa May, Home Secretary. But our researcher has done a brilliant job here, showing in this article the real danger of what's taking place. And embedded in the article, we can see reference to Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Emphasis is by the writer. It says the deprivation of life shall not be regarded as inflicted in contravention of this article when it results from the use of force, which is no more than absolutely necessary. A, in defence of any person from unlawful violence. B, in order to effect a lawful arrest or prevent the escape of a person lawfully detained. C, in action lawfully taken for the purpose of quelling a riot or insurrection. And as the writer points out, this actually means that should somebody be killed by the power of one of these very powerful water cannon, well, the government hasn't got to do anything. Boris Johnson doesn't need to do anything. The police don't need to do anything, because the European Union has said, well, there was a riot, there was an insurrection going on, so somebody got killed, so what? There could not be a better article on the UK column website to alert people to the fact of what's really happening in Britain today. If we're to stop it, we need to make sure that it's the general public that is pushing out the truth. We can't rely on the BBC. And as we're seeing, Britain's press and media failing pretty severely to get the truth out as well. I will end on that note, but we will say there is good news. It is clear to us that more and more people are now talking about what's really happening. The fact the British government is trying to suppress the Freedom of Information Act says that the public has been using that act properly, and it's the revealing of the truth that is now starting to really frighten the government itself. So it's up to all of us to continue to use that act and to push for its retention if we're going to expose what's really happening in Britain today. That's it from UK column. I'll just repeat, if you like what we do need your support. If you think you can write articles, we're delighted to take those. We've had a recent offer of support to help with animation. Thank you very much. We're delighted to take that offer up. But if you think you can assist in any other way, please get in contact with us, because our prediction is that as time progresses this year, we're going to need more and more people to work to expose what's really happening in this under this vicious government of David Cameron. Thanks for joining us. There will be a Crane report tonight. I think that's right, Nick, is it? There will be a Crane report running tonight. And that's it from us today. Thank you. Bye-bye.